Well, welcome back to session 3 of Financial Fitness. And this week we're going to be talking about a couple different things like big purchase decisions, some more financial, just basics. Okay, so we'll jump right in. So there's two things that we want to think of when we're talking about money. Sorry, the mic is... One sec. Maybe that'll help. Cool. Yeah. All right, so there's two things when we're talking about finance. We can divide almost every single thing up into two different categories, an asset or a liability. An asset is something that benefits us, and a liability is something that costs us. So something that grows usually or benefits us versus something that tends to hurt our finances or deplete them. So first thing is appreciating, something that gains value over time. So some examples of that from the audience. What's an appreciating asset? Usually your house. What else? Anything? Baseball cards. Not quite. Maybe. We'll talk about it. Okay. So, Gold. Sometimes. Depends. But yeah. So a lot of things over time tend to go up. The value of our dollar relative to the past inflates over time. I don't know that I consider that appreciating asset, but it does inflate over time. Depreciating, something that loses value over time. What's the first thing that comes to mind with that? Cars, right? Cars are great. They get us from A to B, but they lose their value. The moment you drive a brand new car off the lot, lots of value lost. So, asset will make us money in the long term, and it'll leverage our current wealth to grow more. Liabilities will cost us and drain us. So what's another example of an asset, Dalton? And if you say anything other than your wife, you are wrong. What's another example?
1960s Chevy.
So, classic cars. Sometimes those can become an asset. What if you were driving that 1960s car 40,000 miles a year from the 1960s? No. See? So, it matters. It depends. Stocks, sometimes, yes. Depends on the company. But yes, so what's interesting about this is it's not a perfect black and white. Some things that we think are assets now can end up being liabilities later, and vice versa. Another thing I'll mention with that is an asset that you bought only becomes a liability when you sell. So if I bought my house, let's say, and it lost half of its value overnight, well, I didn't lose money until I sold it. So it still could be an asset to me if I think it's going to rebound. Okay, so clothes, cars, those are the ideas of depreciating things. And then we'll talk a little bit about a sinking fund later about how we deal with that, things that depreciate that we still need. One other thing I'll mention is items that hold their value are generally considered probably depreciating, or they're at least like a net zero. So you don't always have to put things into one or the other bin. But usually if something doesn't gain you value, I'd count it as a depreciating asset or a liability. What are children? Well, when they're babies, I don't know if I want to go into that. Children are a liability until maybe they start working. And when they're teenagers and they're working, if they're a boy, they're even more of a liability because you know the food bill. So, also, I'll apologize to everybody. I look like I should be crashing through walls and trying to entice kids to drink sugary drink. It's because I was skiing all weekend and I got really sunburned. So just ignore the burn. Okay. So Proverbs 22:7 says that we can't serve two masters. So how often do we hear, I'm out of debt except for a house or a car, right? Well, I don't have any debt except house or car. Okay? First off, I'm going to say that find people that say that. That's actually pretty rare now. It's rare for anyone to say that now. Secondly, what about what's that monthly payment going to be? Right? How often do we ask that ourselves or ask other, if we're at a car dealership, we start asking the car salesman, hey, what's that monthly payment going to be? And I guarantee the car salesman's letting you know what the monthly payments are going to be. So when people think they can afford something, in modern American culture right now, we think we can afford the payment. So I just saw a brand new Jaguar F-Type getting washed up at Pickwick here before I came here. It's a beautiful car, expensive car, and I bet the guy that owned it didn't go pay cash for it. He probably makes a pretty good salary, and he probably realized, hey, I can afford the $900 or $1,200 or whatever the payment on that car is every month. He probably figured I can afford that payment based on my income. We want to quit thinking that way. We want to think what the total amount is. And if we're going to finance something, we need to account for the interest as well. So we need to start changing our mindset about that to where we're thinking about the total amount. How much does something cost? I want to hand you $20 and I want to run away with it. Did you have a question? Does that include when you buy a house? Yes, we want to think about what the total cost of the house will be. And we're going to analyze that in the session where we do housing. I think session 6 is where I go over some examples. But you're going to see what paying off a house early is going to cost you versus paying off over a full 30-year term. So yeah, we do want to think about that. Now, the house is one of the exceptions to this. We do want to think about what the payment is going to be because that's such a staple in our budget. And that payment needs to be under what percent of our net income? 25%. Good. So those are the things we want to be thinking about. But you guys get the idea that we're shifting our mindset from talking about payments to thinking about total. If I pay $20, I want to take whatever I just bought home and never worry about it again. I don't want to be making payments, and I don't want to say, well, if I finance it, it now becomes a $30 cost total. So we need to think about that. Ideally, we want to be saving to pay cash. That's the idea. And one thing that I mentioned is poor people will always ask what the payment's going to be, and rich people do ask how much total. And 63% of people who file bankruptcy have severe credit card debt. I'm sure that's not surprising. Okay. Okay, so about 100 years ago, we were a much more cash-focused society. Imagine our grandparents. Imagine the Wild West or the Great Depression. Those people didn't work on debt like we do today. Some of that has to do with the switch to from the gold standard to a fiat currency. Other parts of that just happen to have to do with our culture and the way that we viewed debt and the way that I'd argue capitalism has pushed us towards a more debt-loving society. So most stores, when you go, every time I go to Old Navy or something, they always, when I check out, what's the first thing they ask? Hey, do you want to sign up for a card, right? Why do I want another credit card from Old Navy? Oh, well, we'll give you 20% off your purchase today. What? Okay, that might be $20 if you, I don't know, spent a lot there. I don't go to stores very often. But the point is, like, 20% off right now, $20, and then the first interest payment that you're going to have on that credit card if you run it up or don't pay it off that month is going to be higher than what the discount they gave you. So it's those kinds of things. So the credit card is pushed on us everywhere. They can actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but employees at a lot of these retail places can actually get fired if they don't hit certain credit card quotas. So they are very heavily pushed to try to get people to sign up. It's at least their job to always ask. And the other thing I'll mention is we know it works because people, they keep asking, and we know people sign up. So, okay, so if we talk about living debt-free now, most people are going to laugh at us about that. In modern America, people just, again, they'll laugh you off if you're saying, hey, look, I pay cash for everything. So another interesting fact, our great-grandparents probably thought debt was a sin. Even our grandparents probably thought debt was a sin. And I'll put an asterisk on that to the home mortgage. Very few people can go buy a home on their own. That's an exception to anything I'm talking about with when we say what debts are we allowed to have? I will always say a mortgage is a debt you're allowed to have, but we do want to take care of that as quick as we can. So another one, the debt lie we're talking about. So famous, infamous person, Joseph Goebbels, who was the minister of propaganda for Nazi Germany, said that if you keep spreading a lie long enough, and it's a big enough lie, and you keep repeating it, that eventually it will become truth to the culture. So that's this idea of debt. I really think we've fallen into that people just tell you, live on debt, live on debt. What instant gratification, right? I talked about that in session 1 and pulled out my cell phone and said, we get that all the time. It's ingrained in us now, and it's only getting worse. So people actually now believe they can't live without debt, which we know isn't true. So we're going to talk about the FICO score, which Dave Ramsey likes to call the I love debt score. So you probably were asking, actually we got a question last time, well, how do I make sure my teenager has a good credit score when they come out of high school or college? And yeah, it's sort of important. What's the only thing it's really important for? A mortgage, right? Everything else, do we really care if we're paying cash? I can't tell you guys what my FICO credit score is. I think I get a report once in a while, or my credit card will project it or something. Sometimes when I pay my bill, I'll catch a glimpse. But I really honestly could care less. Because if I'm paying cash for things and I already got my mortgage, then I don't care that much. And if, by the way, if I'm paying off my credit card every month and I'm paying my mortgage on time and I don't have anything going to collections, my credit score is actually going to be pretty high still. So if we do,
actually get dinged on your credit score if you pay off your credit cards every month.
Oh, okay.
They said if you have to make payments every month to your credit card for your score to go up.
Okay.
If you pay it off every month, you actually get dinged and it goes.
So leave a cent every month of interest, I don't know. But so the comment was that you actually can lose credit score if you pay off your credit cards every month. Again, mine is fairly high, and I can't explain because I don't have a whole lot of debt. It's my credit card payoff every month and my mortgage. So we're going to talk about the FICO score. We're going to talk a little bit how it works, how it's calculated, and I'm going to come back to what she mentioned about, well, if you pay off a credit card early, it lowers it. That could be a myth. It could be true. So the best way to grow wealth is not through borrowed money. And you go, well, Josh, how do I survive without debt? Well, it's called money, and we have it, and if we budget it, we make it work for us, and we can invest, we can pay cash for things. So we don't have to have debt to survive. All right, so here's a little bit of how it's calculated. So the amounts owed column, that's 30% of it. Basically, how much do you currently owe to lenders? So how stretched are you? And with all these factors, guys, things can either help us or hurt us in it. So how much we actually owe there's probably a balance there. Too much owed, and it probably hurts your credit score a bit. Not enough owed, and it probably hurts your credit score a bit. So I guess the thing I'm going to preface this with is everything on this chart is intentionally vague. You can go try to Google, you can call a government office, you will not find transparency in any formula of how to calculate credit score. There's no public that I've found or that I know of, so I can't validate if paying off my credit card every month increases or decreases it. I don't know. It's because everything is kept pretty vague. So finding a set formula to calculate your own score is almost impossible. Okay, so the first one, amounts owed, how stretched are you? The next one, payment history. So how reliable have you been in paying back amounts that you've owed? Did you have late fees? Usually late charges don't get you unless they submit you to a credit agency. Then those are the people that call you every day and try to get higher on your list to get paid back. So if something goes to collections, that's going to count against you. I'll tell you a quick story on that. I had a student loan debt, and I set it up for auto pay. And I remember I had been paying, and I would just forget some months to pay it because I had to manually log in and hit pay. So every other month or so, I'd log in and I'd have an overdue, never any charges, but I'd just pay it. Well, I called up the company, and I said, enough of this, I want auto pay. So I set it all up, and got my bank account linked. Everything was good. I checked it the next month or two. Everything was auto-paying perfectly, no problem. So I forgot about it. I never messed with that account again because it was auto-paying. Well, about 6 months later, I get a call from collections from that loan. I go, well, what's going on? Well, what had happened is I set up auto-pay on like December 15th, and the payment due was due on December 13th. And so what this company did is, even though I was paying religiously every month, I had an outstanding balance from December 14th that never carried forward. It just stayed from the 14th. And so they submitted a credit ding against me to collections for that. My credit score dropped like 80 or 100 points overnight because of that one. So I asked the company, I said, hey, can you guys write me a letter? Clearly this was I'm paying on time. This isn't an issue. It's not an issue of non-payment. I'll pay it right now on the phone, no problem. They wouldn't do it. They would not revoke or retract the credit ding from the collections company. So, just an interesting story. So companies aren't likely to go out on a limb for you on that. If you go to collections, it's going to hurt your score. So try to make payments on time and in full. Okay, length of credit history, that's another one. So how long have you been a borrower? So that's why we always ask about the teenagers to say, well, should they have some kind of debt account that they pay or some small loan that they pay? Maybe, arguably, it'll help their score a little, but you guys can see it's only 15%, so it's not that big on here yet anyway. Last one's credit mix. So this is just how many retail accounts, installment loans, mortgage loans, whatever. It's the mix, literally, of everything. And then some of the other, so we talk about FICO system, why we care. It's because we're trying to go get a loan. So it's important that when we're talking about the FICO score to talk about what are some of the other loan factors. We've talked about them a little before, but debt to income ratio is one. Usually for a mortgage, it has to be under about 36%, give or take. Your employment history matters. Most of the time for the bank, you had to have been employed, I think, 6 months or a year with consistent checks coming in before they'll get you a mortgage. The amount of down payment you have obviously factors in, and the total amount that you want to borrow, which we said the banks usually key off of about 33%, maybe even a tad more, of your gross income. Okay. So, should we care? Well, I already talked about that a little bit. Mostly not. Helps us for financing a mortgage. Outside of that, we're generally trying to avoid debt and paying on debt or buying things on debt. So outside of once we have our mortgage, it doesn't matter as much. This doesn't mean that we don't pay back our debts. It doesn't mean that we run. I've mentioned this before too, but as Christians, we should be paying off our debts. That's important. So if you're trying to buy a house in the next 2 years, if you're doing things like credit card method to pay off, if you are religious about paying down or paying off your other debts, if you're doing those kinds of things, it's going to generally help your score. And if you really need some help with that, you can call and you can get some, I believe there are credit score counselors out there, usually in banks and things like that, that can maybe help you to take a few steps that'll improve those. I don't have great advice for how to improve your credit score other than pay off the debts you already have, because that seems to have worked. Okay. All right, how many people are thinking about buying a house right now? So I've got 2, 3, and I bet we have a couple online. Speaking of online, wave to you guys. If you are online, please do us a favor and just put a comment in the chat or something so I can jot attendance at the end of tonight. Okay, so when we're buying a home, how do we know when we're ready? So there are some ways to do it. There are some, like anything in life, there's ways to buy a house well, and there's ways to not buy a house well. If you don't buy a house well, it'll actually end up making you poorer, even if it's growing in value. So one of the industry jokes here is, well, this is why they call them mortgage brokers, right? Because they can make you broke too. Okay, so we're not ready to do this until we get to baby step 3. We'll talk about that a little more. We're ready to buy a house, in my opinion, when we have 20% cash down. So if it's a $200,000 house, you need $40,000 cash. Put it down. And I would argue, ideally, I would like you guys to be buying the house on a 15-year fixed loan, okay? What fixed means is fixed rate, fixed interest rate. There's a lot of really sweet deals out there that'll say, ooh, buy today and we'll give you a 1.5% variable rate loan. That sounds insanely good, but the problem is variable rate means it can go up or down. And what we don't want is when we have a cornerstone in our budget, we don't want that fluctuating every month. If we set it at 25% of our budget, that's where we want that mortgage to stay. We don't want surprises. Not on the mortgage amount. So what I'm going to say is we go for that fixed 15-year. So you can either do a 30-year or a 15-year is traditionally the two types of loans you can get for a house. 15-year is always costs a little bit more, but you pay less in interest over the term of the loan. And it's usually not a lot more than you think. It's not double the payment. It's usually about 30 to 40% more, maybe, tops. So that being said, I still recommend that we buy the 30-year loan. Here's why. We look at the 15-year price, and let's say the 15-year price was $1,200 a month and the 30-year price was $900 a month. We might want to still budget that $1,200 a month and pay that as often as we can. But if something comes up in life and something hits you hard and you absolutely have to free that up, you can dip $300 a month and still pay your mortgage every month and free that money up for whatever else you needed. Key there is to have the discipline to make the extra payments when you can and to not just live off the difference and let it go to a 30-year loan. Question?
That dip won't hurt you, like if you've been like 3 or 4 years paying that $1,200, and all of a sudden you get into a point where you're like, can't pay the $1,200, let's pay $900 this month.
Mm-hmm.
That won't hurt you for that month or two that you pay that $900.
No, so the question is that if I do the 30-year and I'm paying $1,200 a month, and then I have to dip to $900, will it hurt me in any way? No, it'll hurt your payoff timeline a little bit, but it won't do anything from the bank. Paying off early should not hurt you with the bank or with the loan. There's no extra fees. I mean, double check whenever you get your mortgage, but it's rare to find extra fees for paying off mortgages early. Now, what will happen is if you guys lock into a 15-year fixed and you needed that $300 extra, well, you just can't drop. You're locked into that $1,200, so you better come up with it some other way. This is why I recommend it's a discipline thing. Again, I trust people out there listening to have some level of discipline and to be able to actually apply some of the things you're learning here and control that. Control your budget, things like that. So if you have the discipline to pay a little extra on your 30-year loan and then have that safety net, I prefer that safety net, but you need to be disciplined to go back up to that previous level when you can again. But it's just there. It's there as a safety. Okay. And question from earlier, we said, oh, well, does total amount still matter for houses? Yes. And here's where I would have mentioned that. Renting versus buying. So I ran some numbers on that. So the question is, don't buy until, the question is, Josh, should I buy a house right now? I'm going to come to Las Cruces for this brand new job that I got. It's great. I have a family. I want to move here, and I'm going to start this job. Should I buy a house right now? Should I wait a couple years? What else? It's a very difficult question to just answer. It's different for every single person. But one thing to think about is actually you have to remember that when you buy a house, the year you pay the absolute most amount of interest is your first year. Let's go back to the house example I just gave you. If you're paying $1,200 a month in a house mortgage payment, probably about $900 of that is going to interest, okay, every month. It's really sad. Most of that money is just going to interest. And then after a few years, more goes to principal, less goes to interest. It kind of shifts in your favor. The last 5 years, you're paying pretty much just principal. So you actually are paying your house off in the quickest way the last 5 years of the loan. That's why if we can tackle early on, and that's also why we want the 20% down. It really lightens the load from that interest payment. So renting versus buying, I've typically found there are some calculators you can run. It depends on the area you're in, the cost of living, a lot of other numbers. But one of the main things I looked at there or analyzed is that for most people, the answer is 3 to 5 years. That means if I rent for 3 to 5 years, I come out ahead of if I would have bought a house in year one. So if I'm only going to live somewhere 3 years, you might want to consider renting the whole time instead of buying. You're probably better off because you're not really generating that much equity, and you're also having other things. Remember too, I don't absolutely love renting. It is putting money in a hole. That's what every realtor will tell you when they're trying to convince you to buy a house. But there's some merit to it in that you don't have any liability for when things break or property taxes or a lot of other things. So there are some benefits to renting, and if you're going to be somewhere short term, it's usually going to be better for you. I have a link at the end of this presentation that has a calculator. If we have time, I might pull it up and just show it to you. You guys can just Google too, and I forget what it was, like rental break-even point calculator or something like that. It would be along those lines. All right, so for military people out there, do not buy a house every station you go to. It's not usually a good idea. And we're going to talk about VA loans in a little bit. I actually don't recommend VA loans, even though they're a little better. Only if you can put 20% down, because then you get the good interest rate and the 20% down. What typically happens, though, by the way, with the military people is you buy a house at a station, then you move, and now you're a long-distance landlord. And your job is pretty hectic, so you don't really have time. And then when the toilet breaks over there, how do you get it fixed? You have to pay a premium to go send a plumber and all that. So it's rarely worth it to buy a house everywhere you go if you're shipping around a lot. It's probably better to rent or use base housing and just stash the money you would have put and invest it wisely. Okay, do we have questions about the 20% down and 15-year fixed or anything else minimally on house buying right now? Okay. It's important stuff. This is why I wanted to, make sure. All right, purchasing a car. This is another big one. Do we need a car? I need a car, right? Yes. So people say yes. Well, in Las Cruces, I knew a college student, and she used to ride a Vespa around town. And we live in New Mexico. You can ride that pretty much 9-10 months out of the year pretty easily. It's a scooter, yeah. It's an electric scooter. Well, it's gas, sorry. It's a gas-powered scooter. They're pretty cheap. She probably picked it up for under $2,000. I don't know. But my point is that we can, but we just need to be able to get A to B. Most Americans I talked about, we need A to B transportation. So let's say you live in Ohio, like a couple people that are tuning in, or Texas right now, which should be able to have a scooter, but I wouldn't go out right now. Let's say we have to have a car. Well, how do we do it right? So, like the house, like anything else, we want to do it responsibly. So, to buy we'll start with the car industry, I guess. So, fun fact about the car industry, when you go to the lot, new cars actually have very little margin. They're not making that much money on a new car. Where do they make money on new cars? Anybody want to guess? Financing. And what? And extended warranties. Ooh, yeah, those are good. I had forgot about that. Extended warranties are another great one. Same thing, guys. At Best Buy, they're going to offer you the extended warranties on your stuff. Do you think your car is going to break down in 2 years? Probably not. So they know that too, and they're banking on it. So for them, if they weren't making money at it, they probably wouldn't offer it. I'll just put it that way. So new cars have very little margin. They make their money on financing. Dealers make tons of money on financing. The way they do that is they either do their own buy here, pay here, which are usually somewhat predatory. And by the way, they'll lend money to people who probably couldn't afford it. And two, they make it on used car trade-ins. So they'll usually beat you up a little bit on the trade-in and then have a pretty high margin. So they're making good margins on trade-ins and on the financing. And if they don't go through the buy here, pay here, and they go through a bank, the bank gives them a commission for every loan they start. So every loan originated at that dealership gets money for that dealership. So, okay. They actually make money on our losses, on our interest, on our depreciation and use. This is where they're making their main margin. So I looked up, and the average car payment is around $492, and it's a 63-month loan, which is absolutely crazy. That's over 5 years. And I've seen 72-month loans now for cars. Why do you guys think 10 years ago I didn't see 72-month loans? It was very rare. 20 years ago I definitely didn't see it. Why do you guys think that the car industry has gone to 72-month loans? Anyone want to guess why that's creeped up? Prices of cars have gone up. That's actually part of it. The other part of it is they want to keep that monthly payment nice and low. So they know people all think about the payment. That's one of those great traps. 72-month loan, you can say, oh, we can get your payment down to $250 a month. This is no problem. Yeah, but what's the interest, and what's the total price at the end of that? It's going to be high on a 72-month. Another big problem that I'm going to mention with that, guys, is your car depreciates very rapidly. You lose about 25 to 30% of the value in the first year. You're not paying down just like your house. In a 72-month loan, you're not paying down the car enough. I've run into people that were selling cars that said, hey, I just want you to pay me what I owe the bank. Well, there was a car I was looking at, and the guy that wanted it, he wanted like $22,000, $23,000, and the blue book on his car was like 17 or 18. And it's like, nobody is going to pay you the $23,000 that you owe on the car. So keep that in mind, guys. Your car is depreciating faster than you're paying it off, especially on the longer-term loans. So if for some reason you needed to sell that car, you're going to be upside down. So can anybody think of any tools that we might use to analyze a car purchasing decision? Scott, what might be a good one? We talked about it when I came in today. ROI, so return on investment. So we already know car isn't really an investment, but we do want to know what we're getting out of it. And we do need to get A to B, guys, so that is something we're getting as a return on our money spent on a car. So we want to look at the ROI, and we want to look at the opportunity cost. How much are we putting into the car that we could have been putting into our investment account or somewhere else? So those are the things that we care about the most when we're talking about a good car buying decision. 89% of brand new car purchases are financed. Interesting fact. Car payments are an awful investment. We've already kind of beat that one. We do want to try to pay cash for cars. Most millionaires get there because they drive reliable used cars. And I'll talk about that a little more in depth. The number one answer on the Dave Ramsey show that he likes to give when people are in over their head on a big car payment is he actually tells you to sell it, go belly up, and then buy something small. And you deal with that. You deal with the fallout of that, but at least you're not stuck in that payment for however long. I would say it's situational on that. We would need to talk and run some numbers. If you're too upside down, I think I might keep the payment, but it just depends on, it really depends on your situation. Okay, and so from earlier, I mentioned that cars depreciate, and somebody said baseball cards or classic cars. So unless you're Jay Leno, your cars are depreciating. We're putting a lot of miles on them. Caleb.
That's what I was going to ask. Classic
Okay.
Cars, sports cars.
Yeah, sure. So if you're collecting a classic car, but then you're not really driving it much, and then you're intentionally keeping it and storing it and hoping it does. So what pool of money would we pull buying a classic car out of? Investment. So if I'm buying a classic car and hoping it appreciates, I'm going to pull it from that same envelope of money that I've been stuffing away for investments. I also am going to say that if I've only got, let's say, $20,000 total in investments in my whole portfolio, it better not be in a 69 Stingray Corvette or something, right? Because we need to diversify. So if we're buying classic cars as investments, those are going to be a smaller portion of our total investment fund. They shouldn't be all of our investment fund. Question?
One other quick question. Like for me, I'm driving a Mustang right now, and that's always going to be a desirable car. And
Okay.
at a certain point. How would you handle that?
So the question is, I drive a car right now that, in this case, it's a Mustang that tends to depreciate as I'm driving, but it will uptick later. I mentioned this earlier before you came in, but it was essentially if you're putting 40,000 miles a year on the car, do you think it's going to ever uptick for you?
I think eventually,
Probably not. The value goes like,
not normally.
yeah, so the value when you're putting a lot of miles as your daily driver, it goes down. So if we're talking about something that's not a daily driver, then I'd say it's an investment asset, maybe, if you think it'll go up. But there's better things to make money on too, probably. Again, when we get into the high-end exotics, okay, that's a different world. But I would say a 2004 Mustang right now, what's it going for? What about an 84 Mustang, right? So, I'm just think about those things. Our return on investment for if we bought an 84 Mustang and drove it quite a bit probably wouldn't be that great right now. As opposed to if I'd put that same amount of money that Mustang cost me in 1984 in IBM stock, which do you think's worth more?
Oh, IBM.
So that's what I'm getting at. We have to think about what we're giving up to get that. And again, it's a little bit of a hobby too. So we can talk about that, but it can't be a big chunk of your portfolio. Okay, so how do we do a car right? What are some things? So when we own a car, we've got a lot of associated costs. We've got gas, tires, insurance, oil changes, all those kinds of things. Let's not forget that when we buy the car, the government takes a little cut, right? That's TT&L fees. Oh, and let's not forget the gift that keeps on giving, the registration fee. So the government has associated costs with your car every year. And they impose more on us through insurance because that's required. So how do we deal with wear and tear? We have what's called a sinking fund. I mentioned this in session 1, but I don't think I called it a sinking fund. This is money we put away in our budget every month that goes towards, and it's in addition to our emergency fund usually, that goes toward predictable maintenance. I know every 5,000 miles I have to get an oil change. For me, that's about every 3 months because of my commute. So I put money away every month to cover the oil change. Now, in my case, it's only, like, I don't know, $10 or $15 a month in my budget. But I still plan for that. And I know that I need new tires every year and a half, 2 years, give or take. So same thing. Maybe a little extra goes in there. So if I know 24 months, tires cost about $600, that's $30 a month I should be putting away in my budget for the tires. So there's things like that we need to figure out. The average car goes about 15,000 miles a year. The average gas for that's about $146 a year. The average maintenance is up to $100 per month, which we all know we don't probably pay that, but that's what they say average maintenance is. And I'm making a point here. $12 for registration, and about $110 a month for insurance. I think that's per month. So these are all averages. And again, if we shop around, we can do better. If we're easy on our cars, we can probably do better. If we do some of our own maintenance, we way can do better because shop fees are pretty high right now. So I've dabbled in the car business a little bit, buying and selling. And so I'm going to give you guys some numbers from my experience and rules of thumb that we can use, and kind of how to do well with our car. And the last thing I'll mention, guys, this is for a budgeting rule, 50% rule. That means that 50% of anything that has wheels in your household should not exceed your 50% of your income for the year. Well, gross or net, Josh? What do you guys think? Probably net. So if I make $80,000 a year net, let's say, then you'd say, well, $40,000 a year is the max you should have in boats, RVs, cars, ATVs. Snowmobiles don't have wheels, and we don't have them down here, but those count. I see you guys out there. So basically, any of your motorized toys, that counts towards that. So $40,000 would be your budget if 80 was your net. So we want to be pretty smart with that. If you have way more than that, you're probably into a trap that we were kind of talking about with the 1984 Mustang, where maybe it's not really earning you what that money could be earning you. I had a question back here.
You answered it.
Okay.
Boats, airplanes, if
Okay. Question answered. All right. So I'm going to tell you guys a story. I've paid cash for every single car I've ever bought, except for one time. And I was just out of college, and I went and I found a car that I really liked. I had the cash for it, but I had a student loan. So what I did is my student loan was at 8%. The car was a 2.5% or 3% loan. So what I did is I went and financed the car, and then I took the cash I was going to pay on the car, and I just paid off my loan. So that was a really sneaky way for me to refinance for cheap or free. And I talked about that last time, about how dangerous that can be for us to take new debt, or like, let's take a mortgage, an equity loan or something to pay off all our credit card debt. And remember how I said people tend to end back in it? Well, in that case, it worked out because I knew I was just trading, and I had the cash for the car still, and I paid down a different debt with it, and basically took a low interest rate instead of a high interest rate. So that's an example there. We want to get our cost of ownership under $2,000 to $3,000 a year. So I'm not talking about maintenance. I'm not talking about all that stuff, although that factors in. So we'll talk about that a little too. Again, guys, there's a lot of moving parts here, so I apologize. I'm trying to generalize something to give you guys rules of thumb, but there can be a lot of moving parts to these kinds of analyses. So $2,000 to $3,000 a year is where I like all my cars to be. If I can do better than that, I'm even happier. What I mean by that is, let's say I buy a car for $7,000, and in 3 years I can sell it for $4,000. After driving it those 3 years, it cost me $1,000 a year to own. You guys tracking? That's where I'm talking about this cost to own. Now, how much maintenance did I have to put in it? Well, that car, I put the same amount of maintenance as most people would put in any car. It wasn't a special car. Now, if it were a Jaguar F-Type, I'd be putting a lot more maintenance in, and I might need to be thinking about that, planning for that. But this is just a really good rule of thumb for when we're talking about equity in cars. All right. We go more in depth in cars, I believe, in 5 or 6. So I'll save some more examples for then. Okay, so next topic here is modeling millionaires. This section is completely apolitical, guys. It's not red or blue, not rich or poor, not anything. But the question really becomes, should we be demonizing millionaires? A lot of people do. A lot of people get really upset about that. They think, oh, Josh, they stand on the backs of the proletariat and build their wealth. Okay, sometimes they do. But we want to actually, like for me personally, if I want to get better at a sport, I go and I find I would love to train under Tom Brady if I were a quarterback, right? Or Aaron Rodgers or any of the greats. Roger Staubach, if he could still teach me to throw, Dr. Burrows. So, you want to trade under the greats. You want to be better. You want to learn from the best. So millionaires are clearly doing something the rest of us aren't. So what are they doing? And there's a number of people that have gone and studied these things, and they look at what do rich people do, what do millionaires do. So if we can find out what they're doing and be more like them and follow suit, we're probably going to share some of their success. So there's a lot of things they do that we probably don't. First off, 80% of millionaires have never leased a car, all right? So leasing cars, not usually a good thing. And when we go back to some examples of car ownership, you're going to see that leasing a car is very rarely ever in that $2,000 to $3,000 a year cost. It's usually much higher. Millionaires also rarely buy brand new cars. That's because new cars lose an average of $100 per week that they're driven, at least in the first year. They depreciate very quickly. So it goes back to they're investment minded. They would rather spend that money in their investment accounts, in their businesses, in even supporting the community and doing other things than buying a brand new car. It's not to say that some of them don't. We obviously know they do. But Tiger Woods was just in an accident today, by the way. And so that it was pretty severe. Don't have a lot of updates on it. Something that I thought of, he was driving an SUV of some kind. What was it, Avi? Yeah, it was an SUV, but I remembered it wasn't a remarkable car. It's not a Bentley. It wasn't, it wasn't a $100,000 SUV. It wasn't the Mercedes G-Wagon or whatever they're called. It wasn't something crazy. It was a modest SUV. I'm sure it was fairly new, and I'm sure it was fairly nice. Just an example. So wealthy people rarely go out and spend on Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and things like that unless they're an enthusiast. So 75% of the top 400 Forbes wealthiest people say the key to gaining wealth is to get and to stay debt-free. That's nuts. So 75% of the wealthiest people are telling us, get out of debt and don't get new debt. Also, something else to think about is about 80% of millionaires out there are self-made, meaning they grew a business, saved over a long time, or came out of it. They didn't just inherit wealth. Another example I was going to give, it'll come back to me. All right. So there's a number of books out there if you want to read some books. Here are a few recommendations. Again, there's hundreds of them out there. Stanley's pretty good. So many authors and studies that I've looked, they look at the wealthy people, they go study, they do statistics on it, and then they report it. So we got The Millionaire Next Door, Thinking Fast and Slow, Secrets of the Millionaire by Ecker, The Intelligent Investor. So 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27 tells us that the diligent prosper. It's talking about running the race and, just being diligent. So it takes effort, it takes time, it takes sweat, it takes tears. It's not super easy. If getting wealthy were easy, everybody would do it. So it usually takes some discipline. So Tom Stanley wrote the Millionaire Mind, where he studied people who are worth $10 million or more. He found, so remember I said, the wealthy, they just ride the backs and they're just dishonest all the time. He actually found that in this demographic, the greatest characteristic found among all of them was integrity. So the reason why that is if you think business-minded, integrity matters. You're not going to go back to someone that's a snake. So having integrity in your business model is really, really important, and that's why a lot of wealthy people have that as a cornerstone. Even maybe if they're snaky in personal life, they keep their business as high on the integrity meter as possible. So we want to stop demonizing the rich. We want to stop just being jealous. That's where it usually comes from. Maybe a victim mentality. So try to work past that. They fight and maintain an image because it helps with the business. So anybody here remember the E. coli scare at Chipotle or the salmonella one? Almost everyone in here is shaking their heads, and I bet online too. That happened in 2015. Over 3 years, there were, for salmonella? It was like 17 branches and maybe 1,100 people got sick. Okay, that's quite a bit, but do you really think that, how many thousands of Chipotles are there? Or hundreds at least, right? So the point is that their integrity and their image was tarnished by that one thing, and even if it was small and isolated, it hurt their business model. Their sales dropped significantly. I think it was over 30% in that year, 2015. And even now, the public hasn't fully recovered 6 years later. Okay, so here are some practical applications. First off, lending money. I talked about it a little last time. We shouldn't lend money that we cannot afford to ever get back. So again, if this is my $300 food budget and my neighbor needs it, or my best friend or my mom or somebody, either I need to take $50 and just eat ramen for a month and give away the other $250, or I need to say, no, I'm sorry, my family has to eat. I can't give you that money. Even if she says, oh, I'll pay you back in the next month. Well, that's great, but assume they're never going to pay you back. If you have that mindset for lending money, you'll let go of like that anger or any resentment you have if someone doesn't pay you back. Just get there. So we'd never, ever, ever lend money we cannot afford to lose. So the Bible talks about lending and pretty much calls you an idiot. I think it was Proverbs 17:18. Pretty much, really. It says, one who has no sense shakes hands in pledge and puts up security for a neighbor. Literally calls you someone with no sense, which was ancient jargon for idiot. Because somebody challenged me last year on that, and they're like, Josh, does the Bible really say it? Yeah. So I went and looked it up. Okay. So what about co-signing loan? Again, we talked about it a little last time. I would not co-sign a loan for something that I couldn't afford to lose. Now, if it's an asset class, like a house or a car, that was said, well, that's a little better for me to co-sign because I can sell it and I'm not on the hook for everything. Yeah, but you're still on the hook for the difference, and just assume you're going to be on hook for the whole asset. If you're going to co-sign a loan and you're able to afford it, why not you just buy that house and rent it? So some people attending the class, it was their dad wanted to sell a house. And that's great. He has reasons he wants to do that. But there could, if I were going to buy a new house, let's say, for that same couple, and I had to co-sign, well, what's to keep me from the dad is just trying to buy that house and then just rent it to them or do as a rent to buy or something. So you just understand whenever you co-sign, you're taking a lot of risk, and it goes back to rule number 1, which is we don't loan money we can't afford to lose. So if you're willing to lose money and you are sure you cannot lose the relationship over it, then I would say co-sign the loan. But I'll warn you guys with words of wisdom here, there's a lot of danger with this. If things go south on any kind of a co-sign agreement, people tend to disown each other. I have a couple stories on that, but it can get messy really quickly when money's involved. So I typically try not to do business with family or friends unless it's something I can afford to lose. Okay. The next one, home equity loans. Okay, these things are an awful idea, guys. The way these work is you say, well, I've been paying on my house for 10 years and I've got $80,000 of equity or something, and I can grab that $80,000, I can put it into renovations, I can do all this other stuff. Well, you just essentially undid 10 years worth of work. And now you're back into the higher interest payments. So it's just usually not a good thing to do. Also, some people do it because they think, I'm in an emergency, I have to get out of this. Well, what happens is you can turn that emergency into a full-blown life crisis that you won't be able to recover from, possibly ever. The other ones are debt consolidation. We talked about that last time. Debt consolidation rarely works for people because the problem is their psychology and their habits, not the debt itself. Okay, I'll say that again. The problem is your psychology and your habits, not the debt itself. So you're essentially putting a Band-Aid on a amputated leg, right? You're not helping the source problem. Okay, so other ones, 401k loans. These are very similar to the equity loan. I had a friend, a coworker, do that recently, and it kind of worked out for him, but it's just juggling debt. And the way it works is if you don't pay back so you can pull out 401k loans for essentially free or very cheap. And what's interesting is you have to pay interest on what you borrow, but the interest goes back into your 401, so you're actually paying yourself interest. The problem is that when you pull that money out, if you can't afford to pay it back, you get hit with really big fees. So another big thing is taking your 401k early, okay? This is also awful. I have horror stories, but anybody who does it, just assume that a 40 to 50% of whatever you're going to pull out is gone instantly if you pull it out before your retirement age. So this is why, guys, with our mentality of saving and investing, any money that's in our 401k, we are never touching. Assume that money is spent and long gone, and it'll be a great gift for you when you turn 60. That's the idea behind the 401k. It's for retirement, and when we touch it before then, the government hits us really, really hard on it. So you need to assume that was spent and never think of it again, never try to get to it again. Okay. I was still trying to think of that example I had earlier with the car. I have a lot of car stories. So, okay. So how much for defeating debt? how far would minimum wage go, but if we had no debt? Would we be over or under? You think we'd be profitable, or do you think we'd still be at a negative? So I got some nods for negatives.
I think if you live a certain lifestyle, yeah, you can be positive with a
Yeah. So if you live a certain lifestyle, you can be positive with minimum wage if you have no debt. That's actually true. So now, obviously, guys, it still depends what state are you in. If you're living in New York City, no, you're going to have to sleep on somebody's couch, maybe, to live on minimum wage. So cost of living does matter. But in a lot of places, my point is that you can get by if you're very, very austere. You could get by on that if you had no debt. And just remember, guys, most of us don't make minimum wage. Only about 1% to 3% of the population tops makes around that minimum wage. So how much better do we do when we're not making minimum? How much more margin do we have, could we have if we have no debt? All right, so you guys can get there. Everybody can get there. Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but longing fulfilled is the tree of life. That means set goals and achieve them. Proverbs 6:4 says, give no sleep to your eyes and deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter. This is what Dave Ramsey always calls the gazelle intensity, and this is where he gets it. He's talking about, here's debt, we're a gazelle. Debt's basically the cheetah. You run for your life. We're getting away. We're getting out of debt as fast and as intentionally as possible. He wants you to just bust your butt and go. He says, too, you can wander into debt, but you can't wander out of it. You have to be intentional, guys. And I can't stress that enough. That's why I keep repeating some of these things. We have to be intentional to get out of it. We have to have a plan. We have to be disciplined and keep moving toward it. The cheetah only catches that gazelle 1 in 19 times. Why do you guys think that is? It's motivation. The gazelle doesn't want to be lunch. The cheetah, it's just another meal. So the motivation dynamic is way one-sided there. So there's definitely a correlation with the amount of sacrifice and intensity that we're willing to pursue a goal and the success that we're going to have with that. And think about it, guys. There's some redemption just built into that. All right, so how do we defeat debt? We stop taking new debt. We can't get out of debt by borrowing more money. I thought of the example from earlier. It wasn't a car example, it was a different one. But the guy, so I was listening to an interview with the Rich Dad, Poor Dad CEO the other day, and he was talking about the only way to gain wealth is to leverage debt. And he's basically saying all the peons out there don't understand this, and this is what all the really wealthy do. Yes, some of the wealthy do leverage debt, but it's a really dangerous game. If anybody remembers the housing bubble crisis of 2008, you would know that there were people that were daisy-chaining loans and mortgages, and since then, that's illegal to do now. So the way it worked is you used to be able to say, okay, I'm going to go buy a house. I got my 20% down. I'm doing it the right way. I bought this house. I pay on it a couple of years, have a little bit of equity. Then I say, well, I'm going to use this house against this new house that I want to buy. So the bank would say, oh, that's cool. If you don't pay this mortgage, we'll take that house. We're good. So you now own 2 houses. Then the next house, you'd go to house number 2 and say, well, I'll put that up as leverage for house number 3. So people had this chain. That was one of the problems. There were other issues, obviously. So it's this idea, the people that live on debt and leverage debt, that's what they're doing, all right? So what happens when you pull one house or one card out of the whole tower there? It all collapses on you. So leveraging debt is something I don't like to teach and talk about. It can work, and I understand how it can work, but it's not something that, and I don't think as Christians we're called to do that. I don't think we're about leveraging debt. So again, there's maybe some ways to do it and to do it right, but I would not recommend it, and we won't go there in this class. Okay. So stop taking new debt. It's kind of this idea of digging deeper. We don't get out of the hole by digging down way deeper. Okay? So we just need to, debt for our society, in my opinion, is kind of like a cancer. And I'm basically the stop smoking ads. Okay? I'm trying to raise awareness and get people to understand that this can kill people financially. So it's bad for our health. Saving money. We need that emergency fund. We have to. Because the moment something strikes, we have to now dip into that credit card and take debt to get out of it. If we have a good emergency fund, we don't have to do that. Mischief managed for the Harry Potter fans. Sell things that you don't need. Clean the house. Find things that are draining you. Do I really need that 1984 Mustang that's sitting in my garage right now that had an uptick on value? Well, sell it while the market's hot, right? But no, if we don't need something, this is where we go back to that wants and needs analysis. If we're not using something, you guys have probably heard from the Depression era. I know my great-grandmother, she lived through that, and she used to always tell me, waste not, want not. And that woman would repurpose everything. She rarely threw things out. It was pretty amazing. So it's this idea that if we don't need it, we sell it. Somebody else can have it. It can be their problem now. The other thing is we can generate extra income. Remember, guys, I talked about work-life balance. Keep that in your mind always. But if we're in a bad spot, we're in a tight spot, and we need to earn more, take second jobs. Figure things out, okay? Sometimes we have to roll up our sleeves and do things we don't want to do. When I told my wife, I said, hey, if I lose my job, it's going to take me 6 months to find a new job, but what do you think I'm going to be doing in between? I don't care I'm not too proud to go work at McDonald's. So I would do that if I needed to for my family and to support. Or if we were really in debt right now, I might take on that second job just to help. So those are things you got to think about, but if we're really deep, generating extra income is another way to go. More overtime, more side jobs. So where's the best place to go when we're broke? To work, right? Because we're not spending money when we're at work usually, unless the vending machines. The second best place to go when we're broke, probably home, right? Because I talked about that last time. If we're going out to eat, we're going out to bars, or we're going out wherever, we're spending money on activities that maybe we shouldn't be. And then finally, we need to change our behaviors. That's the core of this class, is trying to figure out how do we change the behaviors that lead us to debt. If we can change those mentalities, we can overcome the behaviors in that decision-making process, and then we can get to a point where we're starting to make better decisions and they become habit. For Christians, what that looks like is prayer. We can do that too, guys. Prayer works. Give it over to God. He'll also help you with changing that behavior. Okay. 5 steps to pay off all your outstanding debt. Use the 5 steps. So baby step 2, this is where we talk about it, I guess. Pay off the debt. So here's where we had baby step 1, we saved $1,000. It's our baby emergency fund. We have the minimum bare bones. We saved for that. Now we're going to start debt, what Dave Ramsey calls the debt snowball. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a list of all of our current debts. Then we're going to start with the smallest debt in amount. We're going to pay that off. And then once it's paid, we're going to pay the next one. And then the next one. So I'm going to give you guys an example here. Let's say I owe my buddy Rigo $200, but I'm paying him $50 a month. I owe the credit card company $100 a month. And I don't know, total amount maybe $5,000. And then I owe my car payment, and let's say it's $30,000 because I bought a big car, and it's $300 a month. What I'm going to do is I'm paying the $300. What I say for the other one? Let's just say it's $150 a month for the credit card, and then $50, right? So I'm going to start. Dave Ramsey says start with the lowest one. You pay off your buddy Rigo. And then once that $200, so after 4 months, that $200 is gone, that $50 frees up. Then we're going to take that $50 and we're going to lump it into that credit card payment. So the credit card payment will be $200 a month, every month, so we're paying it down faster. And the other one up here is still $300 a month for the car payment or whatever. So once we pay off the credit card, well, now we have $200 extra every month that we can start throwing at the car payment. And once the car payment's done, now we've got the $500 or so total that we could now start throwing towards our mortgage every month or other debt, right? It's this idea, he likes to take the smallest debt and he likes you to knock it out. There's a reason for this. It's a reward psychology. When you knock out that low debt, you feel successful, you feel like you've done something, and you feel like you're not just spinning your wheels. You feel like you've earned or built something. That's really good, and that's a really good feeling, and it's great because you feel the progress as you go. However, I'm a mathematician. Interest rate matters. So, the psychology of that approach is terrific. And if you do that, that is awesome. But I'm remiss if I don't tell you that I actually recommend you start with your highest interest loan. So if that credit card was 24% and your buddy Rigo is only charging you no percent, I'm not saying you don't pay him off, but I'm saying maybe you say, well, I'm going to start putting all my extra into that credit card first. And even though it seems like a behemoth, you're going to still chip away at it. And knocking that out first is going to be more beneficial to you in the long run than knocking out lower interest rates first. So in the scenario I gave, the credit card would probably be first for what I'd snowball. Somewhere in there while I'm snowballing it, Rigo would have got paid off anyway. I just wouldn't have put extra towards his. And then the car would be last. So I recommend we start with our highest interest rate first and really focus on that, laser focused. My approach only works if we're really disciplined though. So if you want that psychological payoff and you need that progress, and you'll self-examine, guys. You know kind of what your personality is. You know what you need as a person and as a couple. So those milestone goals, if those are what really work for you, then do that. But those are the two things. These are just some of the debts up there that I mentioned: credit card, student loan, personal loan, family loans, medical bills, other debts. If you feel that you're ever defeated and you just stop aggressively paying down the debt, then you're going to end up back at square one. So try to stick with that. Try to make that a habit. No matter what, every month we're paying extra on debt in baby step 2. And as Dave Ramsey always says, gazelle, as hard as you can go, as fast as you can go, and this is the step where he really likes you to hit it running. Baby step 3, extending the EF. So what this is we're going to take that and we're going to extend that $1,000 and we're going to put more into it, because for most people, $1,000 would not last you 3 to 6 months. Okay, I can't name anyone that would last 3 to 6 months. So we want to calculate our budget. In the $35,000 example I gave you, that was about $3,000 a month. So that means that we would want to expand our savings to $9,000 minimum, because that would be 3 months of debt, or budget, right? Maybe even $18,000 if we wanted 6 months. Okay, we want that emergency fund to grow. Imagine if we had $18,000 in our emergency fund and my car breaks down completely. Am I worried about it? No. I go and I'll go find a 4 to 7 to 8 to 10, whatever I decide my budget is, and I'll find another car. And then what we do is we revert back and we build that EF back up as quick as we can, stop whatever else we were doing, build that fund. But this gives us that nice big cushion after we're debt-free. Before we start hitting investments really hard and before we start doing a lot more with that, this is what we're doing. So you guys have to sit down as a couple, or if you're single, as a single, or with your accountability partner, kind of figure out what you think your emergency fund should be. Some people like more than this. I would actually say probably not more than 6 months. If you have that much cash sitting there, it's not working for you. And that's where the person who says, hey, that money's not working for me, has validity, because you want money working for you. So if you've got more than 6 months banked up, you should probably be putting in investment funds and other growth funds. Okay. So also remember that this part is more insurance. We're buying insurance by this, as I illustrated in my example. Baby step 3B here, if we don't own a house, this is where we start saving for it. I would definitely prefer to be saving for the house, for the down payment, after we've eliminated debt. I know some people do these things concurrently with BS2, but again, it's situational dependent, and we generally want to own the house. When we buy our house, we generally want to be debt-free if possible. And remember, I said 3 to 5 years somewhere. You don't want to rush to buy a house, but we need 20% down. We do it around here. So you guys will have to figure out what your right amount is, but mainly we're trying to fend off Murphy and his 3 brothers who are broke, desperate, and stupid. So we don't want to worry about those guys again. Has anyone here ever financed a vacation? It's kind of a little bit of an off thing, but this makes the point or drives it home on the reason we have this emergency fund. If you've ever financed a vacation, it's really nice. You're on the beach. You spend a week in Cancun, like some politicians. You go and you spend that week, and it's awesome. It's fun. It's great. But if you financed it, you come home, and now you're making payments on it. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. And that part's not fun about vacation. Not only that, sometimes I couldn't imagine if I'm on vacation thinking, oh man, I'm going to have to pay this back. It might even ruin my vacation a little bit. So, main point with that is we want to expand the EF so that we have room for life storms. And I should say this too, the EF is not for vacations. Remember, our emergency fund is there for emergencies. We shouldn't be dipping into it for non-emergencies. It takes, I'll remind you again, nuclear launch code. If you're married, both people push the button to break the bank for the emergency fund. Okay? We plan and budget for vacations, and we do that somewhere else in our budget. And frankly, once we're in this phase, we don't necessarily have to be as aggressive on the EF. We can increase our luxury budget a little bit here. This is where you could say, hey, I'm going to grow toward that, but we're going to put a little more toward vacation too right now, because we're not in debt. And when we're not in debt, we have a lot more money coming in. So, the right amount for your emergency fund depends on your career, volatility, your health, what your needs are. We're going to talk about insurances next time in session 4, but that's a thing. If you're self-employed, I mentioned this before, I think, but you guys definitely want more in your emergency fund. You want to be in the higher end of this. Or if you have variable income, you want to have more in your emergency fund. Because months where your budget comes out short, that's what it's for. It'll help to level you out a little bit. So the emergency fund, though, the biggest thing to remember is that money isn't working for you. So once you've done your 20% down for your house and have your 6 months saved, now we're ready to make that money work for us. All right, so next time we're going to talk about marketing psychology and kind of how they get you. Big decisions and purchases. How do we do the really big things, especially house? I think house is next time. How do we negotiate effectively? This is one of my favorite things to teach in the class. There's some really good negotiation tricks and ways to, when you're sitting there across the desk from somebody, how do you get the best deal possible? We're going to learn how to analyze risk a little more. I'll give you guys some examples there, and then we'll do an insurance deep dive, and that's more of a shallow dive because I have printouts for everybody, and I will skim over them, give you guys a little bit of insight on them, but mostly it'll be a handout with just some tidbits on it. So, and if you ever have questions on insurance stuff, you can shoot me an email or something, and I'll try to give you a specific advice, but I'll try to rush over that because that's a little dull. I think that part of the class is a little bit dull, so I shortened it. Any questions tonight from anything we had or questions that popped up in the last week?
So we have an RV,
Mm-hmm.
and RVs are total money pits. Now, the RV is kind of like a house in that you're paying mostly interest up front, and then
Mm-hmm.
later it's principal. But if you know that you're going to be upgrading to a different RV in the next, say, 3-4 years, do you still recommend hitting it hard and fast to pay this one off?
Okay, so the question is, if I have a depreciating asset, like an RV, and I know I'm going to upgrade it in 3 to 4 years, and I have a certain amount of debt. And how long was your debt term?
15 years.
So I had a 15-year, and you've been paying on it over 10, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
So the question is, do I want to aggressively pay it? And I would say probably, but I might make that a lower priority if I'm going to sell it. The context here is I'm planning on in 3 years selling that RV, getting what I can from it. We're going to upgrade and buy another one. So I would say we definitely want to be debt-free almost everywhere else if we can by then. And I would still say, even though it's depreciating, we want to pay it off because we have to. The cost-benefit analysis there depends on how much interest we're paying. So if you had a really low interest rate, then I'd say no. But if you had a high interest rate, I'd say yeah, probably. It all depends on how much money we're going to end up paying total in interest, and then what I project it's going to be worth in 3 or 4 years, and if that's worth it or not.
And don't be upside down.
Yeah, and not be upside down. Yeah. So again, if it's like a 1% interest rate, I'd say, we have no other debt. I might consider there telling you to invest instead of, even though that's a cardinal sin. If you have any debt, you're not supposed to invest at all. So it can get, that's why I say, guys, everything is very, very situational, but I'm giving you the tools to say, well, what would we be giving up by paying off that debt, and how much money total, so if we think about how much it's costing us total, then we can make that decision better. Questions from online, anybody? Nothing? Huh? Oh. Lag. Okay. I'm sorry. So the live stream is lagging. Okay, I have another question.
So, you talked a little bit about student loans.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recommend paying that off? Because I have multiple loans. Some of them are,
High interest, different amounts.
right, different amounts. Some of them are just,
So,
but they decide what order they get paid off in, not me.
okay. If it's one of those, call the company. So the question was, what do I do about student loans? I get the sense that you have an account that has maybe 4 different ones, and they just give you the total, and then when you make an extra payment, they disperse it over all of the principal of all of them. So if they will refuse to allow you to target the highest interest rate first, which they shouldn't, but you might have to call, if they refuse to do that, then the answer to that of how do I deal with my student loans is the same as I'd give for any debt, and that's one bite at a time. We work at it slowly over time with whatever we can throw at it. Still gazelle intensity, so as quick as possible, but we're chipping away every month. So if it's a split disbursement like that, it's just put whatever your snowball amount would be in it every month, whatever you can throw at it, and eliminate it as quick as you can. Other than that, high interest rate's better, but you have to take that into account. Dalton.
So what if my job requires me to have a certain uniform, or I need tools of the trade, and I don't have that money to start off with? So taking on debt for a job, is that acceptable?
Okay, so the question is, I need tools of the trade or a uniform or things for my work, and I don't have the money for that. Do I take on new debt? Is that acceptable? The answer is we try not to take on new debt at all, but let's think about the opportunity cost. Okay, let's say my new job is a nuclear reactor core repairman, and I'm going to make $75,000 a year, but I need to buy a special Tyvek suit that my job won't provide for some reason, and I need special steel-toed boots, and everything I need comes out to $400 or $500. Would I be smart in saying, well, you know what, I can't afford those right now. I don't have an emergency fund. You know what, I'll just get a different job. That's okay. right? So what do you think the answer is? So no. So our opportunity cost is we're losing $75,000 a year in income over $500. Put the $500 on your credit card and pay it off the first paycheck or two. Make sense? So yeah, that one's so one-sided for what you're getting and what you're giving up that's a no-brainer. Now, if your tools of the trade are really expensive, that's when you have to think about it, and you got to think about it a lot. So entrepreneurs might start, if it's a really good business model, or they think it's going to be a good business model and they're going to take that risk. At that point, you're getting venture capitalists, though, so use other people's money. I don't know. That's a different discussion, I think. But for the most part, yeah, if it's fairly cheap amount, like uniforms, things like that, and maybe computers up to maybe a couple $1,000s, you have to have it for your job, yes, go get it, because you have to have it day one. Other questions? All right, well, thank you guys for coming. Oh, that calculator's cool. I'll show you guys that real quick. So your homework this time is we want to make a list of all your debts, excluding your mortgage. You can add that if you want, but it's the bottom of your list. I want you to put them in order from smallest to largest, and then also determine what your BS3 emergency fund amount should be. Should it be 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 months? What makes sense for your family? What amount do you think you should have? Okay, so James, would you mind double-clicking this tool? Did we get any questions in from online? Okay. Would you mind double-clicking this tool? I'll give you guys just a really, really brief 30-second on it, and we'll dismiss. This was called a buy-rent calculator, by the way. So I Googled buy-rent calculator. And again, this is just to try to figure out, should I buy or should I rent if I'm in a new city and I'm only planning on being there for a certain number of years? Is the equity worth it? Basically, is the juice worth the squeeze? Hey, there it is. Okay, so would you scroll down a little, please? So notice on the right, this is just it. You've got some sliders here for your home price. You've got some sliders for how long you want to stay. And then over at the right, it says, if you can rent a similar home for less than $884 per month, then renting is better. It just gives you that break-even analysis. And you can play with the sliders, and it'll give you the amounts that you need to break even. So it's kind of a cool little tool for renting versus buying. That's really important for people who are young in their career, who might be moving around a lot, or maybe if you're in a really high cost of living area or something like that. So, all right, that was it, guys. So thanks for coming.